Welcome back to Kamikaze Overdrive MMA predictions for UFC 130. It seems like forever since UFC 129 where I went 5-2, which improved my prediction record to 82-38. I've already talked about how the event played out during my UFC 129 podcast, which you can check out on my YouTube channel. UFC 130 will take place on May 28th live from Las Vegas' MGM Grand Garden Arena. The rematch of Frank Yeager and Gray Maynard unfortunately has been dropped due to injury, so we have a new main event, and I will be providing predictions for the 5 main card fights as well as the 2 undercard matchups that we will see on Spike. And on that note, let's get to the predicting. In the opening Spike preliminary, Tim the Barbarian Boach, 12-4, will square off with Kendall the Spider Grove, 14-8. Grove has gone 3-3 in his last 6 fights, and the Barbarian has won 4 of his last 5 with a 1-1 record in the UFC during that stretch. For the betting odds, I have Boach as the favorite at $1.55 and Grove at $2 even. Now the first thing that needs to be addressed is Tim Boach's cut to middleweight. On the positive side of the cut, Tim should have a significant strength advantage as a middleweight, as he has already shown himself to be very strong when fighting at 205. Further, a change in division gets him away from strong wrestlers like Phil Davis, Matt Hamill, and Jason Brills, whom Tim had issues with when he fought them. On the negative side is the endurance issue. Tim has shown that his endurance isn't built to go for 3 rounds without slowing down. That was a concern at 205, and if the weight cut doesn't go well, it could really hamper his performance at 185 pounds. For Kendall, this guy is in need of some consistency. He's alternated wins and losses over his last 6 fights, and you have to go back to 2006-07 to find his last winning streak of any significance. Further, Grove's record is getting dangerously close to 500 at 14-8, so his UFC career could be up for grabs. Another big number that stands out for me is 5, which is the number of times that he's been stopped by KO or TKO. Now he does have 7 submission wins, which seems to be his best method for picking up a victory, but Boach only has been submitted the 1 time, and that was by Phil Davis because of Davis' superior wrestling. Besides his submission skills, Grove has some decent striking. Against Munoz and Maia, he was able to connect flush with punches when he timed his opponent's attempt to go for a takedown, but he was unable to finish either one when he did score. Munoz was able to recover and eventually overwhelm and pound him out, and Maia dominated Grove on the mat and looked good in the striking department. Now, even in his defeats, Tim Boach was able to do some serious damage on the feet against Brills and Hamill until they took him down and controlled him. I don't think Grove will have that option to put Tim on his back if the Barbarian is doing damage with his striking. Grove is capable of submitting Boach, but that would involve either Grove scoring the takedown or Boach putting Kendall on his back and then making a mistake. Statistically, Grove has only completed 4 takedowns in 12 UFC fights, and Boach has scored the same amount over a 6-fight span, so the chances of this bout hitting the mat via takedown aren't that high. I think the more likely scenario is these guys exchanging strikes on the feet, and with the success that Boach has had in the past, when it comes to landing power, and Grove's issues with being knocked out, I have to go with the most likely situation. So my prediction is Tim Boach to defeat Kendall Grove by stoppage. In the second televised prelim on Spike, we have featherweights Miguel Torres, 38-3, taking on Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson, 13-1. Both fighters are looking to build on victories in their promotional debuts. Torres is riding a 2-fight winning streak, and Johnson has won 3 in a row. I have Torres as the betting favorite at $1.25, and Johnson as the dog at $3.05. This is a pretty big fight for both guys. Torres is looking to maintain his position in the upper echelon of the division, and Johnson has an opportunity against a former champion to put himself in the title picture. Demetrius is coming off an impressive win over Kid Yamamoto, where he used his speed and takedowns to secure the W. Torres, on the other hand, defeated Antonio Banuelos primarily with his left jab and his enormous reach advantage. Johnson has to be one of the fastest fighters in the UFC. He is very quick on his feet, he is constantly moving, attacking from different angles, changing up levels, he switches up his stance, which can create problems for his opponent, and overall his ability to close the distance and attack is very hard to deal with. Using his quickness, he will use various combinations, both punches and kicks, and he has the ability to shoot for a takedown with the smallest of openings. Now for Torres, he has altered his approach over his last 2 fights. He keeps his left hand way out in front and has a lightning fast jab, while his right hand is pulled back by his head, ready to swing with power. Torres was able to neutralize both Charlie Valencian and Antonio Banuelos using this style, as they were simply unable to get inside Miguel's reach. On the mat, Demetrius has 5 career submissions, but if Torres is a jiu-jitsu black belt with 23 tap-outs on his resume and only 1 defeat. I expect that Johnson is going to come out and push the pace, looking to get inside and engage. For Miguel, his key will be to maintain patience and use his jab to keep Johnson away. Torres will have a 10-inch reach advantage in this bout, and looking back at Johnson's lone defeat, he seemed to struggle with Brad Pickett's striking when Pickett had only a slight reach advantage. Further, Johnson had issues with being taken down by Pickett. Although Demetrius was able to spring back up to his feet multiple times, more often than not, Pickett was able to mount and control Demetrius. Taking nothing away from the Brit, but if Johnson was controlled by Pickett, I would expect the skills and long limbs of Torres could create even more problems. And Torres' low stance will make it hard for Johnson to score his own takedowns. Now, Miguel used his power and reach to subdue two very aggressive fighters in Valencia and Banuelos, and I see a lot of similarities between these two fighters and Torres' UFC 130 opponent. I wouldn't be surprised if Torres replicates his performance from his last fight, but with Johnson's aggression, I expect more action and more opportunities for Miguel to engage. So my pick is Miguel Torres to defeat Demetrius Johnson by submission. Moving to the welterweight division, Thiago Pitbull Alves, 23-6, will meet Rick the Horse Story, 12-3. Alves is looking to put together back-to-back wins, and Story is in search of his sixth straight victory. I have Thiago as the favorite at $1.65 and Story at $2.30. This is another one of those fights that is a matchup of styles. Thiago Alves is striking against Rick Story's wrestling. But even though you can classify these two fighters in their particular disciplines, you can also see the evolution of MMA with these two guys, as the Muay Thai fighter likes to use takedowns, and the wrestler is developing into a dangerous striker. For me, grappling could really dictate how this fight plays out. Alves' last three defeats, 2 against Fitch and 1 versus GSP, came for the most part because Alves wasn't able to defend against being taken down. Subsequently, Alves holds victories over talented wrestlers in Josh Koscheck and Matt Hughes because he was able to defend against their takedown attempts. So the question is, what group does Rick Story's wrestling put him in? Now, Alves will also utilize takedowns as he showed in his last bout with John Howard, but I wouldn't expect too much of that in this fight. For Rick Story, his best chance of taking the fight to the mat will be to back Alves against the cage and drag the Brazilian to the ground. But Alves, especially against Koscheck, showed solid takedown defense, and in his fights with Fitch and GSP, there were multiple occasions where Thiago was able to get back up to his feet after being taken down. Now, the combination of Thiago's takedown defense and Story's improving striking leads me to believe this fight could break down into a slugfest. On the feet, Story possesses power in his hands and solid leg strikes. His best attack form comes when he batters his opponent with both hands in a flurry, first attacking the head and finishing with a series of blistering body shots. He has solid leg kicks, but there are areas of concern with his striking that make him vulnerable. Brian Foster was able to time Story's head movement and connect with several power shots, and against Hendricks, Story seemed to tire noticeably and slow down. Alves' Muay Thai striking is lethal, as he demonstrated when he outclassed another talented Muay Thai striker in John Howard. He possesses some of the best leg strikes in all of the UFC, and if he's able to unload with his kicks, he will quickly reduce Story's mobility. Rick has a huge opportunity in this fight, especially if he's able to have success with his wrestling, but I don't know if he's at the level of GSP or John Fitch with his grappling skills. Further, Thiago's endurance looked very good in his last bout, which can be attributed to his new diet regimen, and I have Thiago Alves defeating Rick Story by decision. Moving up to the middleweight division, we have George Santiago, 23-8, squaring off with All-American Brian Stann, 10-3. Santiago has won 2 in a row, while Stann has won 4 of his last 5. On the books, I have the fight fairly even. Stann might be a slight favorite, but to make it simple, I'll say $1.65 each. Now we have a matchup of one fighter, Brian Stann, who's looking to continue his climb up the middleweight ranks, and George Santiago, who has been regarded as one of the best middleweights outside of the UFC, trying to show he can succeed upon his return to the octagon. Looking at Stann first, he put on an impressive performance in his last outing versus Chris Lieben, stopping the uber-tough crippler inside the first round. Stann demonstrated fluid foot movement while using his strength to outmuscle Lieben and eventually catch him with a left before finishing him off with some ground and pound. I think that Stann's transition to Greg Jackson's camp may have helped Stann refine his skills and deal with the issues that were keeping him from competing at a top level. For Santiago, he has torn through 11 of his last 12 opponents, which included avenging his lone loss in that time span. In that run, he stopped 5 opponents via KO or TKO, submitted 5 and took only 1 to decision. So to say the least, he's a finisher. George is a BJJ black belt, so he is quite dangerous on the mat, which has been Stann's Achilles heel in the past. On the feet, George has serious power and multiple ways of delivering it. He has good hands, mixes in flying knees, and will use a tie clinch with knees. Santiago has impressive numbers, having recorded 12 wins by sub with 0 submission defeats and 9 KO or TKO victories. But there's another glaring number that stands out to me, and that's the 5 career knockout defeats. That really has me questioning his chin. Brian Stann has serious power. He joined the elite company of Anderson Silva when he knocked out Lieben, which suggests that if he connects with George's chin, the Brazilian could be in trouble. Looking back at Santiago's knockout defeats, he got stopped by Muhammad Khalidov in a manner that you don't see often. Khalidov was on his back and hit Santiago with a punch from the bottom that stunned George and led to the eventual stoppage. 3 of his knockouts prior to that came against guys in the UFC, Alan Belcher, Chris Leben, and current featherweight contender Manny Gambarian. Plus, in his most recent victory, he got rocked by Kazu Mizaki. George has solid stand-up, but there's a lot of evidence suggesting that if he gets tagged, it could be lights out. As I already mentioned, Stann has issues with a fighter that can put him on his back in the manner that Phil Davis did. George has shown the ability to take guys to the ground, but I question if he'll be able to put Stann on his back. In fact, I have seen multiple occasions in which Santiago wound up on his back and wasn't able to get back to his feet. For now, for how this fight might play out, if Brian Stann can keep the fight standing, I expect to see even more improvement in his stand-up from his last fight. Santiago is dangerous, but I think his chin is vulnerable, and Stann's striking will be able to expose this. So my prediction is Brian Stann to defeat George Santiago by stoppage. Bouncing up to the heavyweight division, Travis Browne 10-1 will take on 24-4 Stefan Skyscraper Struve. Browne is fresh off his draw with Czech Congo, while Struve has won 2 in a row and 5 of his last 6. I had the veteran Struve at $1.35 and Browne paying out at $2.95. Now this matchup pits 2 heavyweights with differing striking repertoires. You have Struve, a patient and almost textbook striker, against Travis Browne, an aggressive brawler whose technique leaves a lot to be desired. Now I don't mean this so much in a negative manner, because for the most part Browne's style has got the job done, but you're probably not going to see too many Travis Browne striking instructional videos. In his last 2 fights, his most effective weapon was a powerful left hand. He dropped James McSweeney with it and rocked Czech Congo when it landed. The issues I see with Browne's striking is his setup. Against Congo, Travis frequently dropped his hands when he attacked, which left glaring holes that a talented striker should be able to expose. Further, Browne seemed to almost run or jump at his opponents when engaging, throwing wild looping punches, and when he did this, he would lead with his head. But he does possess power, and if he lands on Struve's chin, I have to think that it could be enough to end the fight, because Struve has been stopped before. But at the same time, Struve did demonstrate a solid chin against Paul Buentello, and the ability to survive a beating against Christian Moorcraft. Struve is going to have a sizable reach advantage at 5 inches, which could create problems for Browne as he will need to find a way to get inside. Struve's striking technique could also give him an edge against a much looser Browne. Travis Browne does have some nice ground and pound, which he also showed against McSweeney. After dropping his opponent with the left, he was able to gain a dominant position, control his downed adversary, and pummel away with punches and elbows until the ref stopped the fight. Looking back at the aforementioned Struve Moorcraft fight, Struve got taken down and severely beaten up on the mat for almost the entire first round, and even though he survived on that night, this could be Browne's best chance for victory. But Struve is a talented ground fighter. He has 14 career submission wins, including 2 in the UFC. In his fight with Sean McCorkle, Struve got taken down early and spent the majority of the first round on his back. After defending Kimura at Sam, Struve was able to attack with his own Kimura from the bottom and used a sweep to full mount and an eventual ground and pound stoppage. From his guard, Struve's long live served to neutralize his opponent's top game, and from both the top and bottom they provide multiple opportunities for submissions that other fighters are unable to grab a hold of. Revisiting Browne Congo, Browne noticeably gassed after the first round and would have lost the fight had Congo not been deducted a point in the second stanza. Browne's endurance failed even though he was being the aggressor in round 1, and further adding to my concern was that he wasn't really fighting at a pace that should have worn him out so quickly. So for me, the questions are, how effective will Browne's striking be, and whose ground game wins out should the fight go to the mat? I expect that Browne will come out aggressive, looking for the big haymaker, approaching this tilt much like the Congo fight. Additionally, if he's able to put Struve on his back and control him, he is quite capable of earning a stoppage victory. Now this is what I predicted for Browne against Congo, but he really wasn't able to do much more than land a few power strikes, and I think that his success could be attributed to Congo hesitating more than Browne executing. In this matchup, Struve's striking will create all kinds of problems for Travis. If he can't get inside the reach, I expect him to do a lot of swinging and missing, which could gas him even quicker than his last fight. So my prediction is Stefan Struve to defeat Travis Browne by stoppage. Remaining in the heavyweight division for the co-main event of the evening, 14-5 Frank Mir will meet Roy Big Country Nelson 16-4. Mir has won 5 of his last 7, and Roy Nelson is returning after a lengthy layoff, which was preceded by a defeat versus Junior Dos Santos. On the books, Mir is the betting favorite at $1.65 and Nelson the dog at $1.95. The first thing I want to touch upon for this matchup is the lengthy layoff each guy has had. For Mir, he last fought in late September 2010, and Roy's last bout was in early August of the same year. So the first question is, who rebounds better from the layoff? I would speculate that Nelson could have the bigger issues with ring rust and conditioning. Nelson isn't the most conditioned athlete, and even though he has displayed a willingness to continually push forward in spite of being exhausted. Since 2006, he's 2-4 in fights that have gone into the third round. Conversely, he is 9-0 in bouts that have ended inside the first frame, so if Mir's going to beat Nelson, he will need to drag him into the later stages of the fight. For Frank, he is returning after a poor showing against Mirko Cro Cop that was mildly salvaged with a late knockout, so he will be looking to put on a much better performance this time around. Now, if this fight goes to the ground, both guys are accomplished BJJ black belts. Mir has 8 career submission wins and Nelson 5, and neither fighter's ever been tapped out. We really haven't seen much of Nelson on the mat, and you have to go back to a stretch between 2004 and 2006 to when he secured all 5 of his tap-out victories. For Mir, 3 of his last 5 wins have come via submission, so it would appear that he has been accomplishing this at a higher level of competition, so I would have to give Mir the edge on the mat. But I'm really not counting on an overwhelming amount of ground fighting in this matchup, as I expect most of it will be contested on the feet. In recent memory, both of these guys have put together some impressive striking-based victories. Nelson stopped Struve and Brendan Schaub, while Mir took out Big Nog with probably his best overall striking performance of his career, and used power shots to floor Congo and put away Mirko Cro Cop. On the receiving end, Nelson got lit up by JDS, taking an excessive amount of power strikes, but to his credit refused to go down and got in a few of his own. For Mir, he got pounded out by Shane Carwin, and it would appear that Carwin and before that Lesnar provided the most problems to the former champ. In each outing, Mir's opponent was able to use their strength to control Frank either on the cage or on the mat, and then deliver overwhelming power strikes leading to the stoppage. Nelson's best shot to score the KO is a looping overhand right. He throws it with reckless abandon, and when it lands, as it did on Stefan Struve, it can be fight-ending. He doesn't do a lot of technical boxing, relying on a left jab, sometimes using a left hook, and at most will throw a 1-2 combination. For Mir, he will need to avoid Nelson's right and bring a similar game plan to the one he used in the Nogueira fight. Frank used a lot of straight punches, throwing 3s and 4s in combination, and he changed up his delivery frequently, mixing in an uppercut. Now, the uppercut Frank used in that fight didn't have a huge windup, as it was almost a jab that he turned over. When Nelson fought Dos Santos, he covered up continually by putting his hands on the top of his head, which protected against punches from the outside, but created an opening right down the middle where his elbows were. Junior had some success with his uppercut, but because of the bigger windup, Roy was able to read and react. If Mir uses his much shorter delivery, he should be able to find a home for his punches between Nelson's arms. I also like the way Frank mixes in kicks, which will serve to keep Nelson on edge. Now, all 5 of Frank's defeats have come by way of knockout, so Nelson's best chance will be to connect with that right early in the fight. Frank will need to keep Roy at the end of his punches, remain patient, and not get drawn into a brawl. I would think that it is more likely that Nelson's endurance slows him down, making him susceptible to Mir's striking attack, than Nelson knocking Frank out. Roy's a hard guy to finish, so my prediction is Frank Mir to defeat Roy Nelson by decision. In the main event of the evening, light heavyweights Matt the Hammer Hamill 11-2 and the former divisional champion Quinton Rampage Jackson 31-8 will go to war. Jackson is in search of his 2nd consecutive victory, while Hamill is looking for his 6th straight win. On the books, Jackson will be the betting favorite at $1.35 and Hamill at $3 even. Talking Matt Hamill first, he is a top-level wrestler, but you have to go back to 2007 to find a fight that Matt dominated with his takedowns. His victory over Tito Ortiz exemplified his trend, as he spent the majority of the first 2 rounds standing before changing things up and taking Tito down in the 3rd. For Rampage, there is really no mystery to his game plan. Page will come into this fight looking to score the knockout. Quinton has 3 KOs inside the octagon, and in his fights with Keith Jardine and Rashad Evans, he came close to ending those fights with 1 punch. Hamill's striking is improving, his most impressive KO being of the head kick variety against Mark Munoz. But without discrediting his striking accomplishments too much, Matt hasn't really been matched up with many elite level strikers. The last time Hamill exchanged with a noteworthy stand-up fighter, it was Rich Franklin. Rich won by 3rd round KO via body kick, and Franklin had a decisive advantage in the striking, totals at 71-13. That was a few years ago, and yes, Matt has improved, but it's been against guys that for the most part, like Matt, were wrestlers still working on their striking. For Rampage, he's fought against many top-level strikers, Rashad Evans, Lyoto Machida, Vanderlei Silva, Shogun, and the list goes on. His last 2 opponents, Evans and Machida, used their speed and elusiveness to make it difficult for Jackson to find success on the feet. In both tilts, Page did a lot of chasing and punching the air. Now, I wouldn't expect Hamill to provide the same issues, as he has had a tendency to stand for the most part directly in front of his opponent. Now, Matt doesn't throw a lot of combinations, but what he will do is double and triple up his jab. He will also use kicks, which could be a key to success, as Quinton has had problems in the past with not checking leg strikes, most notably in the Forrest fight. Matt has a tendency to hang his hands, which creates openings that he can ill afford against Jackson. Now, Hamill is a patient fighter that probably isn't going to overwhelm his opponents with his aggression, but Rampage is just the opposite. He likes to push forward, looking to connect with a flurry of punches. This can be effective, but in the Evans fight, Page got clipped and stumbled early because of his forward motion. Now, I would have to say that Page is the better striker and should find success in the feet against Matt. Now, keeping this fight on the feet could be major issues. As previously mentioned, Matt is a talented wrestler and is capable of taking his opponent to the ground and keeping them there. He has pretty good takedowns at 48% success, but it is his top control that is most impressive. His ability to stay heavy on top makes it difficult for his opponents to get back to their feet. Against Tito, Matt took him down, controlled him, passed to the side control, and almost had Ortiz in the crucifix. If Hamill plans to use his wrestling is the main focus of his attack, he could very well walk away with a victory at UFC 130. Rampage has had problems with fighters that were able to out-grapple him. He was taken down several times by Dan Henderson early in that fight. He was mounted by Forrest Griffin, and Rashad Evans was victorious primarily because he was able to control Quinton along the cage and then put him on his back. But it is not all doom and gloom, as his takedown defense sits at a solid 75%. He's only been submitted once almost 10 years ago, and his ability to pick his opponent up and slam them is always a threat. He also showed in the Henderson fight that he's able to get up after being taken down, and I really like the way Rampage attempts to punish his opponent on the disengage from the clinch. Matt has a tendency to get a little too caught up in his striking, and I think that his cornermen would agree with me, as there have been a number of fights where they have been pushing Matt to use his wrestling more, and Matt seemed almost unwilling to oblige them. Now, having reviewed his past fights, Hamill had issues with both Jardine and Tito when they were aggressive. He seemed to have trouble settling in because of their forward motion. Now, I expect Rampage to act in a similar fashion right from the start, and I think that Matt's recent success against less talented strikers could work against him, as he will look to exchange with Quinton. Jackson will enjoy this fight much more than his last two, as he won't spend the night chasing his opponents around the cage. Matt will need to use his wrestling, but his tendency to wait until the later stages of the fight could really cost him dearly, as I will be taking Rampage Jackson to defeat Matt Hamill by knockout. Welcome back to Kamikaze Countdown. Let's get right into it. I have a couple things I want to touch upon. The first being this idea. I'd like to see in The Ultimate Fighter, Dana offer some form of performance bonus per round. Fight of the round, knockout of the round, and submission of the round. It'll really encourage the kids to make some extra cash, go out and perform, and give money to guys who finish, because there's a lot of fighters who go in there looking to play it safe and ensure they make it to each round. Why not say, hey, I'll give you an extra $5,000 if you go out and finish your fight or put on a heck of a good fight. I think, do it round by round will really have a good impact. Secondly, injuries. Well, UFC 130 has been affected by injuries with Frankie Edgar and Gray Maynard pulling out. Nothing you can do about it. That fight's going to happen eventually. But I want to jump to the next thing, and that's Brock Lesnar. Diverticulitis has stopped him from fighting in his main event with Junior Dos Santos. Shane Carwin steps in. That'll still be an excellent matchup. But I have to wonder, he's saying it's not going to end his career, but I think it could affect it in the sense that UFC might not be willing to put Brock on as the main event, seeing as that diverticulitis can show up at any moment and potentially knock him out of a fight. If they're going to do so, it might have a strong co-main event or other heavyweights on the card that are preparing that could fill in for him, or they might not let him headline at all anymore. Either way, I wish Brock a speedy recovery and hope to see him back inside the octagon as quickly as possible. And that's Kamikaze Countdown. So those are my predictions for UFC 130. You can check out the odds and payouts on the KO betting card. I did my best to shorten my predictions to make my show not so lengthy. I also cut out the fighter highlights in an effort to lessen my workload, as there are a number of events on the calendar in June. You might have noticed I'm wearing my new Kamikaze Overdrive hat and shirt. I had them made up for the UFC 129 Expo. So please feel free to comment on all you've seen here. Check out my post-UFC 130 podcast that I will try to post on the Sunday after the event. And I will see you back here for my next show in June. Thanks for watching.